air creatures of motion, built to charge or flee. Yet this one stood rooted, its dark eyes fixed on something at its feet. "That's not right," Lena muttered, her breath fogging in the chilly air. She lowered the binoculars, her dark braids swinging as she turned to her companion, a young wildlife volunteer named Sam Carter. Sam, barely 20, was all wiry enthusiasm, his freckled face flushed from the trek across the uneven terrain. He clutched a notebook, scribbling observations, though his eyes kept darting to the buffalo. "He's not moving," Sam said, his voice tight with unease. "Shouldn't he be running? I mean, we're not exactly stealthy out here." Lena nodded, her brow furrowing. The crunch of their boots on the dry grass, the faint clink of their gear, it should have sent the bull thundering away. Instead, it stood its ground, its heavy breaths visible in the crisp air, each exhale a plume of vapor that mingled with the scent of sagebrush and earth. She squinted, catching a glint of something unnatural near the buffalo's hooves, a flash of green, like nylon or netting, half buried in the dirt. "Let's get closer," Lena said, her voice steady despite the knot of curiosity tightening in her chest. Slow and low. "He's hurt, but he's not spooked. Something's keeping him here." They moved cautiously, skirting the edge of a shallow ravine where the wind carved eerie whistles through the rocks. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, a sea of grass broken only by clumps of yucca and the distant, jagged peaks of the Absarika Range. As they closed the distance, the buffalo's condition became clearer. Blood streaked its flank, seeping from a deep gash above its hind leg. Its right foreleg trembled, favoring an injury Lena couldn't yet see. Yet its eyes, deep, liquid pools of resolve, locked onto hers, and she felt a jolt, as if the animal were assessing her, not with fear, but with purpose. "Careful, Dr. Whitefeather," Sam whispered, his hand hovering near the tranquilizer gun slung across his back. "He's huge. If he charges—" "He won't," Lena said, though her pulse quickened. She'd seen buffalo charge, their hooves shaking the earth like a freight train, but this one seemed anchored, its massive shoulders hunched protectively. She crouched again, her knees sinking into the cold soil, and peered at the ground beneath the bull. The green netting was tangled around something, a writhing shape that let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound no prairie creature should make. "What the hell is that?" Sam hissed, his notebook forgotten. Lena's heart skipped. She adjusted her position, catching sight of a long, scaly body thrashing weakly against the net. A crocodile, impossibly out of place in this arid wilderness. Its jaws snapped feebly, its tail lashing against the buffalo's forelegs, but the buffalo didn't flinch. Instead, it lowered its head, nudging the net with its muzzle, as if trying to free the trapped creature. The crocodile's eyes, slits of amber, darted wildly, but the buffalo's presence seemed to calm it, its thrashing slowing as the bull's shadow loomed overhead. "This is insane," Sam said, his voice rising. "A crocodile? Here. And the buffalo's just standing there." Lena's mind raced. Crocodiles didn't belong in Montana. The nearest river capable of supporting one was hundreds of miles away, and even then, it was no habitat for a reptile this size. Nearly 10 feet long, its armored hide glinting with a sheen of dried mud. The net, she realized, was no accident. It was heavy-duty, the kind used by poachers or traffickers, its edges weighted with metal stakes driven into the ground. Someone had set a trap, and the buffalo had stumbled into it, or chosen to stay. "Poachers," Lena said, her voice hard. She'd seen their work before, traps for wolves, snares for bears, but this was different. Exotic animal trafficking was rare in these parts, but not unheard of. A crocodile could fetch thousands on the black market, destined for a private zoo or worse. But why was the buffalo still here, guarding this creature it had no reason to protect? She edged closer, her boots sinking into the soft earth, the scent of blood and musk growing stronger. The buffalo's ears flicked, but it didn't charge. Instead, it let out a deep, rumbling bellow that vibrated through Lena's chest, a sound both mournful and commanding. Its eyes met hers again, and she swore she saw something beyond instinct, a spark of understanding, a plea. "Easy, big guy," she murmured, her voice soft as she raised her hands, palms out. I'm not here to hurt you. The buffalo snorted, its breath hot and heavy, but it shifted slightly, revealing more of the net. The crocodile's tail thumped weakly, its strength fading. Lena's gaze traced the buffalo's wounds, the gash on its flank, the limp in its leg. It had fought to stay here, to protect this stranger in its world. Why? Sam, get the kit, she said, not taking her eyes off the buffalo. We need to stabilize them both, but we can't spook him. Sam hesitated, then nodded, scrambling back to their pack. Lena stayed low, her heart pounding as she studied the scene. The buffalo's massive frame blocked the wind, shielding the crocodile from the dust that stung Lena's face. Its hooves had churned the earth around the net, as if it had been pawing at it for hours, maybe days. The thought made her throat tighten. This creature, wounded and exhausted, had chosen to stand guard. She glanced at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered, their edges glowing with the threat of lightning. Time was short. If the buffalo collapsed, or if the crocodile succumbed to its injuries, whatever story they were part of would be lost. And Lena knew, with a certainty that came from years on this land, that this was no ordinary encounter. The buffalo's resolve, its refusal to flee, spoke of something deeper, a mystery she was meant to unravel. Hold on, she whispered, to the buffalo, to the crocodile, to herself. She reached for her radio, her fingers brushing the cold metal as she prepared to call for help. But before she could speak, a faint sound cut through the wind, a low, keening cry from somewhere nearby, hidden in the tall grass. The buffalo's head snapped toward it, its body tensing, and Lena froze. Something else was out there. The keening cry pierced the wind again, faint but unmistakable, like the wail of a wounded animal or something more human. Lena Whitefeather's hand froze on her radio, her eyes darting between the massive buffalo bull and the tangled net trapping the crocodile. The buffalo's head swung toward the sound, its blood-streaked flank quivering as it let out a low, guttural bellow that seemed to rumble through the earth itself. The Montana prairie stretched endlessly around them, a wind-swept expanse of dry grass and eroded sandstone, but the air felt heavier now, charged with the approaching storm and the weight of an unfolding mystery. Sam, did you hear that? Lena whispered, her voice barely audible over the howl of the wind. Her braid whipped against her shoulder as she scanned the tall grass, its brittle stalks swaying like a restless sea. Sam Carter, the young volunteer, crouched beside her, his freckled face pale. Yeah, he said, his voice tight. Sounds close. What's out there? Another animal. Lena didn't answer. Her years as a wildlife biologist had taught her to trust her instincts, and every nerve in her body screamed that this was no ordinary situation. The buffalo, 2,000 pounds of raw power, its woolly chestnut coat matted with dust and blood, stood resolute over the trapped crocodile, its dark eyes flickering with something Lena could only describe as determination. The crocodile, its scaly body twisted in the poacher's net, hissed weakly, its amber eyes dulled by exhaustion. The buffalo's wounds, a deep gash on its flank, a limp in its right foreleg, told a story of struggle, yet it refused to leave. And now, that cry. We need backup, Lena said, finally keying her radio. This is Dr. Whitefeather, Badlands Sector. We've got an injured buffalo and a crocodile caught in a poacher's net. And something else, possible distress call, unknown source. Requesting veterinary support and a ranger team, ASAP. The radio crackled, and a voice broke through. Lena, this is dispatch. Did you say crocodile? Confirm location. Confirmed, Lena said, her eyes never leaving the buffalo. Mile marker 17, north of the ravine. Hurry, storm's closing in. As she clipped the radio back to her belt, Sam pointed toward the grass. There, look. A faint trail of trampled stalks led away from the buffalo, disappearing into a cluster of yucca plants about 20 yards off. The cry came again, weaker now, almost swallowed by the wind's rising wail. Lena's pulse quickened. Stay here, she told Sam. Keep an eye on the buffalo. Don't approach unless I signal. But, Sam started, then nodded, gripping his tranquilizer gun tightly. Got it. Lena moved cautiously, her boots crunching against the gravelly soil, the scent of sagebrush sharp in her nose. The buffalo watched her, its massive head lowering slightly, as if acknowledging her intent. Its heavy breathing filled the air, a rhythmic huff that mingled with the crocodile's faint hisses. She followed the trail, her hand brushing the cold steel of the knife at her hip, ready for whatever she might find. The yucca plants parted to reveal a shallow depression in the earth, hidden from the open prairie. There, tangled in another net, was a second crocodile. Smaller, perhaps 6 feet long, its jaws bound with a cruel strip of wire. Its tail twitched feebly, and its eyes, wide with panic, locked onto Lena. The cry she'd heard wasn't human, it was the desperate, muffled sound of this creature fighting for air. 2 of them, Lena breathed, her mind racing. Poachers didn't just stumble into the Badlands with exotic animals. This was deliberate, organized. But why was the buffalo standing guard over the larger crocodile, ignoring this one? She knelt, examining the net. The wire around the smaller crocodile's jaws was cutting into its flesh, blood pooling in the dirt. It thrashed weakly, its cries growing fainter. Lena! Sam's voice cut through the wind. He's moving. She spun around to see the buffalo shift, its massive hooves pawing the ground near the larger crocodile. It lowered its head, nudging the net with its horns, as if trying to tear it free. The crocodile snapped its jaws, but the buffalo didn't flinch. Instead, it let out a soft, almost mournful vocalization, a low moan that Lena had never heard from a buffalo before. It was as if the bull were speaking to the trapped creature, calming it. "Hold on," Lena called to Sam, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. She scrambled back to the buffalo, her boots slipping on the loose gravel. The storm clouds were closer now, their edges glowing with lightning, and the air smelled of ozone and dust. She crouched near the buffalo, keeping a respectful distance, and studied its behavior. The bull's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the crocodile, its massive body a shield against the wind. It was protecting this creature, risking its own life to do so. "Sam, get the cutters from the kit," Lena said, her tone urgent. "We need to free the big one first. The buffalo's not going to let us near it, otherwise." Sam nodded, sprinting to their pack. Lena's gaze shifted to the buffalo's wounds. The gash on its flank was deep, likely from a blade or a trap, and the limp suggested a sprained or broken leg. Yet it stood firm, its muscles taut, its breath labored but steady. She noticed something else, a faint scar across its shoulder, a mark she recognized from her years tracking the Blackfeet herd. This was no ordinary bull. They called him Thunderheart, a lone male known for his size and strength, often seen leading stragglers back to the herd. Stories among the elders spoke of his uncanny awareness, as if he understood the land's rhythms better than most. "Thunderheart," Lena murmured, testing the name. The buffalo's ears flicked, and she swore its eyes softened, just for a moment. "What are you doing out here?" Sam returned, panting, with the bolt cutters in hand. "Okay, how do we do this without getting trampled?" "We don't rush," Lena said. "He's not aggressive, but he's protective. We move slow, show him we're helping." She approached the buffalo, her hands raised, her voice low and soothing. "Easy, big guy. We're going to get your friend out." The word felt strange. Friend, but it fit. The buffalo's actions defied everything she knew about animal behavior. Predators and prey didn't protect each other, yet here was Thunderheart, standing vigil over a creature that belonged to another world. As she edged closer, the crocodile's tail lashed, catching the net and sending a spray of dirt into the air. The buffalo snorted, its hooves shifting, but it didn't charge. Lena's heart pounded as she knelt beside the net, her fingers brushing the coarse nylon. The crocodile's amber eyes followed her, its body tense but still, as if sensing her intent. The buffalo lowered its head, its horns inches from her shoulder, and for a moment, she felt the weight of its presence, a force of nature, ancient and unyielding. "Sam, on my mark," Lena said, gripping the cutters. "We cut the main line here." "Ready." Sam nodded, his hands trembling. "Ready." Lena glanced at Thunderheart, meeting his gaze. "We're helping," she said, as if he could understand. And maybe he did. His ears flicked, and he took a single step back, giving her space. She snapped the first line, the net loosening slightly. The crocodile thrashed, its jaws snapping, and the buffalo let out another bellow, deep and resonant, calming the reptile. Lena worked quickly, her hands steady despite the wind's bite and the distant rumble of thunder. But as she cut deeper into the net, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a small metallic device glinting in the dirt, half buried beneath the crocodile. A tracker, magic quotes, a poacher's tool, used to monitor trapped animals. Sam, look at this, she said, pointing to the device. He crouched beside her, his eyes wide. Is that a GPS? Yeah, Lena said, her voice grim. This wasn't just a trap. They were coming back for it. The buffalo snorted, its massive head swinging toward the grass where the second crocodile lay. Lena's gaze followed, and the pieces clicked into place. 2 crocodiles, 2 nets, a tracker. This was a coordinated operation, and Thunderheart had stumbled into it, risking everything to protect the larger crocodile. But why? And what was the second crocodile's role in this? The cry came again from the grass, weaker now, and Lena's stomach twisted. Time was running out, for the crocodiles, for Thunderheart, for them all. The storm was almost here, and with it, a new danger. She glanced at the tracker, then at the buffalo's unwavering stance, and knew the answers lay somewhere in the chaos of this impossible scene. Sam, we need to move faster, she said, her voice sharp. Get to the other one. Now. The Montana sky churned with storm clouds, their edges crackling with lightning as the wind whipped across the prairie, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and sagebrush. Dr. Lena Whitefeather knelt beside the massive buffalo bull, Thunderheart, her hands slick with sweat as she gripped the bolt cutters. The larger crocodile, its scaly body still tangled in the poacher's net, hissed weakly, its amber eyes flickering with fading strength. Thunderheart stood over it, a towering sentinel, his chestnut coat streaked with blood from a deep gash on his flank, his right foreleg trembling but resolute. The second crocodile, smaller and wire-bound in a nearby patch of yucca, let out another keening cry, its muffled wail cutting through the storm's rising roar. Sam, keep working on the small one. Lena shouted, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Sam Carter, the young volunteer, scrambled through the grass, his bolt cutters glinting as he hacked at the net around the second crocodile. His face was taut with fear, his freckles stark against his pale skin, but he moved with purpose, driven by the urgency of the moment. Lena's heart pounded, her breath catching as she cut another strand of the net around the larger crocodile. Thunderheart's massive head loomed above her, his curved horns catching the faint light of the storm. His deep bellows vibrated through the ground, a sound that seemed to steady the crocodile's thrashing. She could feel the weight of his gaze, those dark, liquid eyes watching her every move, not with aggression, but with something closer to trust. It defied everything she knew about buffalo. They were wild, unpredictable, yet here was Thunderheart, wounded and exhausted, standing guard over a creature that had no place in his world. Almost there, Lena muttered, her hands shaking as she snipped the final heavy line. The net loosened, falling away from the crocodile's tail, but its jaws were still caught, the nylon biting into its flesh. The tracker she'd found earlier, a small, blinking device, lay in the dirt, its red light pulsing like a warning. Poachers were out there, maybe watching, and the storm was closing in fast. Thunderheart shifted, his hooves crunching the gravel, and for a moment, Lena froze, her breath catching. He could crush her with a single charge, but instead, he lowered his head, nudging the crocodile's flank with his muzzle. The reptile stilled, its tail curling slightly, as if responding to his touch. Lena's chest tightened, awe and fear tangling together. This wasn't just instinct. Thunderheart was choosing to protect this creature, risking his life to do it. Lena, the wire's too tight. Sam called from the yucca patch, his voice strained. It's cutting into its mouth. I can't get it off without hurting it. Hold on. Lena shouted back. She glanced at the larger crocodile, its breathing shallow now, its eyes half closed. Time was running out for both animals, and Thunderheart's wounds were worsening. Blood seeped steadily from the gash, pooling in the dirt. She needed to free the crocodile and stabilize the buffalo, but the storm's first raindrops stung her face, and the wind was turning the prairie into a blur of dust and grass. "Thunderheart," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "I need you to let me do this." She reached out, her hand hovering inches from his muzzle, her heart racing. It was a risk. Touching a wounded buffalo was madness, but something in his eyes told her he understood. Slowly, impossibly, he dipped his head, his warm breath washing over her hand, and stepped back, giving her space. Lena's breath hitched. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned to the crocodile. She slid her knife under the net around its jaws, careful not to nick its scales, and sliced through the final strands. The crocodile snapped its jaws once, free at last, but didn't lunge. Instead, it lay still, its sides heaving, as Thunderheart let out another low moan, a sound that seemed to ripple through the air, calming the reptile. "Sam, how's it going?" Lena called, wiping rain from her eyes. "I've got the net off, but the wire's still on." Sam yelled. "It's bad, its mouth's bleeding." Lena glanced at Thunderheart, then at the tracker in the dirt. The poachers could return at any moment, and the storm was making the terrain treacherous. Mud was already forming under her boots, slick and unforgiving. She made a split-second decision. "Leave the wire for now. Get the vet kit, we need to stabilize them both." Sam sprinted back to their pack, his footsteps slipping in the mud. Lena turned to the larger crocodile, checking its wounds. The net had cut deep, leaving raw, bloody patches along its side, but it was alive, its eyes brighter now. Thunderheart stood close, his massive shoulders shielding it from the wind, his head lowered as if to check on it. Lena's mind raced. This buffalo wasn't just protecting the crocodile. He was collaborating with her, trusting her to help. Sam returned, panting, with the veterinary kit slung over his shoulder. Sedatives, bandages, antiseptic. What first? "Antiseptic for the buffalo's gash," Lena said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Then we'll get a sedative ready, but only if he needs it. He's calm now. Let's not break that trust." She opened the kit, pulling out a bottle of antiseptic spray and a stack of gauze. Thunderheart's eyes followed her, his ears flicking as rain began to soak his coat, turning it a darker shade of brown. She approached slowly, her boots sinking into the mud, and held up the spray. "This is going to sting, big guy," she said, her voice soft. "But it'll help." To her astonishment, Thunderheart didn't move as she sprayed the antiseptic into the gash on his flank. The wound was deep, likely from a poacher's blade, but the bleeding slowed as she pressed gauze against it, her hands steady despite the wind's howl. The buffalo snorted, his breath hot against her shoulder, but he stood firm, his massive body a wall against the storm. "Lena, the small one's not looking good," Sam shouted. He was kneeling beside the second crocodile, his hands bloody from trying to loosen the wire around its jaws. "It's barely moving." Lena's stomach twisted. She glanced at Thunderheart, then at the larger crocodile, now free but weak. The buffalo's bellows grew softer, almost rhythmic, as if urging her to act. She made a choice. "Sam, help me with Thunderheart's leg first. If he goes down, we lose our chance to save them all." Together, they worked quickly, wrapping a support bandage around Thunderheart's trembling foreleg. The buffalo's weight shifted, but he didn't resist, his eyes locked on the larger crocodile as if ensuring its safety. Lena's heart swelled. This creature, wounded and exhausted, was holding the line for them all. As they finished, a distant rumble cut through the storm. Not thunder, but the sound of an engine. Headlights flickered on the horizon, bouncing across the uneven terrain. Lena's blood ran cold. The poachers. "Sam, get the radio," she barked. "Call for the rangers, now." Sam scrambled for the radio, his voice shaking as he relayed their position. Lena stood, her hand on Thunderheart's flank, feeling the warmth of his coat under her palm. The buffalo turned its head, meeting her gaze, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the scientist and the sentinel, bound by a shared purpose. The larger crocodile stirred, its tail thumping weakly against the mud. Thunderheart bellowed again, a sound that echoed across the prairie, and Lena knew the fight wasn't over. The poachers were coming, the storm was raging, and the second crocodile's life hung in the balance. But as she looked into Thunderheart's eyes, she saw something unshakable, a strength that defied the chaos around them. "We're not done yet," she whispered to herself. The headlights grew closer, and the real battle was about to begin. Rain lashed the Montana prairie, turning the earth into a slick, muddy quagmire as Dr. Lena Whitefeather stood beside Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull whose chestnut coat glistened with water and blood. The storm's roar mingled with the distant growl of an approaching vehicle, its headlights cutting through the dusk like predatory eyes. The larger crocodile, now free from the poacher's net, lay panting in the mud, its scaly hide raw but stable. Thunderheart's deep bellows echoed, a steady rhythm that seemed to anchor the scene, his dark eyes fixed on the reptile as if willing it to survive. In the nearby yucca patch, the smaller crocodile still struggled, its jaws bound by wire, its cries faint but persistent. Lena's heart pounded. She had stabilized Thunderheart and freed one crocodile, but the poacher's return loomed, and time was slipping away. "Sam, status on the Rangers?" Lena called, her voice sharp over the wind's howl. Sam Carter, soaked and shivering, clutched the radio, his freckled face illuminated by the faint glow of the tracker they'd found in the dirt. "They're 10 minutes out," Sam shouted back, wiping rain from his eyes. "Sheriff's team is with them, said they've got a lead on the poachers." Lena nodded, her braid heavy with water as she turned back to Thunderheart. The buffalo's gash was bandaged, his forelegs supported, but his breathing was labored, each huff a plume of vapor in the cold air. Yet his presence was unshakable, his massive shoulders hunched protectively over the larger crocodile. Lena marveled at his resilience. The wound should have felled him, yet here he stood, a guardian in the storm. She touched his flank, feeling the warmth of his coat, and his eyes met hers, steady and trusting. The bond between them, forged in the chaos, felt almost sacred. "We need to move them," Lena said, her mind racing. "The big one's stable enough, but the small one's fading. And we can't let the poachers get here first." Sam scrambled back to the smaller crocodile, his hands fumbling with the wire around its jaws. "I've loosened it, but it's still cutting in. I don't know if I can get it off without a vet." Lena glanced at the headlights, now closer, bouncing over the uneven terrain. The poachers weren't slowing down. She made a call. "Help me with the big one first. We'll get it to the truck, then come back for the other." Together, they rigged a makeshift sling from their gear, sliding it under the larger Ordner Por, Mas recent, Mas antiguo, Mas votatus larger crocodile. The reptile was weak but cooperative, its amber eyes tracking their movements as they eased it onto the sling. Thunderheart watched, his hooves sinking into the mud, his low moans urging them on. Lena's arms ached as they dragged the crocodile toward their truck, parked 100 yards away, the rain turning the prairie into a slippery nightmare. As they loaded the crocodile into the truck's reinforced cargo bed, the headlights of the poacher's vehicle broke through the storm, blindingly close. Lena's stomach lurched, but before she could react, Thunderheart bellowed, a deep, earth-shaking sound that stopped her cold. He stepped forward, placing himself between the truck and the approaching vehicle, his horns lowered like a challenge. "Thunderheart, no!" Lena shouted, but the buffalo held his ground, his massive frame a wall against the storm. The poacher's truck skidded to a halt, and two figures jumped out, their silhouettes blurred by the rain. Lena grabbed her radio, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Dispatch, this is Whitefeather. Poachers on site, mile marker 17. Armed and dangerous. Hurry." A gunshot cracked through the air, and Lena dove behind the truck, pulling Sam down with her. Thunderheart roared, his hooves pounding the mud as he charged forward a few steps, then stopped, his head swinging toward the smaller crocodile. Lena's heart sank. He was protecting it, even now. "Stay down," she hissed to Sam, peering over the truck's edge. The poachers, clad in dark raincoats, were shouting, their words lost in the wind. One raised a rifle, but Thunderheart bellowed again, a sound so primal it seemed to shake the storm itself. The poachers hesitated, and in that moment, the distant wail of sirens cut through the rain. The Rangers. The poachers froze, then bolted back to their truck, peeling out as red and blue lights flashed on the horizon. Lena exhaled, her body trembling with relief, but the smaller crocodile's faint cry pulled her back to the moment. She and Sam sprinted to the yucca patch, where the reptile lay, its breathing shallow, the wire still biting into its jaws. "Hold its head," Lena instructed, her hands steady as she worked the bolt cutters around the wire. Thunderheart limped closer, his wounded leg dragging, and let out a soft moan, as if encouraging the crocodile to hold on. The wire snapped free, and the crocodile's jaws parted slightly, blood dripping into the mud. Lena applied antiseptic and gauze, her fingers numb from the cold, and Sam helped her lift the smaller creature into a second sling. As they carried it to the truck, the Rangers' vehicles arrived, their headlights illuminating the scene. A veterinarian, Dr. Maria Torres, leapt out, her face grim as she assessed the situation. "Lena, what the hell is going on?" "Crocodiles. Poachers," Lena said, her voice tight. "Exotic animal trafficking. Thunderheart's been guarding them." Maria's eyes widened as she took in the buffalo, his massive form looming in the rain. "That's incredible. Let's get them to the sanctuary. We've got a temporary enclosure ready." The drive to the nearby wildlife sanctuary was a blur of rain and tension. Thunderheart followed the truck on foot, his limp worsening but his resolve unbroken, as if ensuring the crocodile's safety. At the sanctuary, a heated enclosure awaited, its concrete floor lined with straw. The crocodiles were settled inside, their wounds treated by Maria's team. Thunderheart stood just outside, his breath steaming in the cold, his eyes fixed on the reptiles. Lena watched him, her throat tight. His coat, once matted with blood and dust, glistened under the sanctuary's floodlights, the rain washing it clean. His wounds were healing, but his strength was fading. Maria approached, her face softening. "He's a fighter. We'll stitch him up, give him antibiotics. He'll pull through." Lena nodded, but her mind was on the tracker they'd found. Back at the sanctuary's office, she examined it, a high-end GPS device, military grade. She called the sheriff, who confirmed her suspicions. The poachers were part of a larger ring, trafficking exotic animals for private zoos. The crocodiles, likely smuggled from the south, had been abandoned when the poachers' vehicle broke down, and Thunderheart had stumbled across them, refusing to leave. "Why would a buffalo do that?" Sam asked, his voice hushed as they watched Thunderheart from the office window. Lena's gaze lingered on the bull, his massive head lowered toward the enclosure. "He's Blackfeet," she said softly. "The elders say buffalo carry the spirit of the land. Maybe he saw something in those crocodiles, something worth protecting." Maria joined them, her clipboard in hand. "He's not just any buffalo. We ran his blood work, his genetic lineage is rare, one of the last purebred descendants of the original plains herds. Researchers are going to want to study him." Lena's chest tightened. Thunderheart's actions weren't just instinct, they were a testament to something deeper, something science might never fully explain. She stepped outside, approaching the buffalo. He turned to her, his eyes softening, and nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, a gesture so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. "You're a miracle," she whispered, her hand resting on his warm coat. The bond between them felt like a promise, one she'd fight to honor. As the storm cleared, revealing a star-streaked sky, a new development emerged. The sheriff called, his voice grim. They'd tracked the poacher's vehicle to a nearby town, uncovering a warehouse filled with cages. More animals, more evidence. The case was blowing up, and Thunderheart's story was spreading. Lena looked at the buffalo, his silhouette majestic against the night, and knew his legacy was just beginning. The Montana dawn broke over the wildlife sanctuary, painting the prairie in soft pinks and golds, the air crisp with the scent of damp grass and sagebrush. Dr. Lena Whitefeather stood at the edge of a temporary enclosure, her boots sinking into the dew-soaked earth as she watched Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, graze calmly in a nearby paddock. His chestnut coat, once matted with blood and mud, gleamed under the morning light, the stitched gash on his flank healing into a faint scar. His right foreleg, supported by a brace, bore his weight with growing strength, and his deep, rhythmic bellows echoed across the open plain, a sound that carried both power and peace. Inside the enclosure, the two crocodiles rested in a heated pool, their wounds bandaged, their amber eyes alert but calm. The bond between Lena and Thunderheart, forged in the chaos of that stormy night, felt like a quiet fire, burning steady and strong. The sanctuary buzzed with activity. Dr. Maria Torres, the veterinarian, coordinated a team of researchers who marveled at Thunderheart's rare genetic lineage, a direct descendant of the purebred plains buffalo, a living relic of the American West. Reporters hovered at the gates, their cameras flashing as they clamored for details about the buffalo who had guarded 2 crocodiles against poachers. The story had gone viral, sparking debates about animal intelligence and conservation. Lena, however, kept her focus on Thunderheart, her hand resting on the wooden fence as she watched him toss his massive head, his curved horns catching the sunlight. "He's looking stronger every day," Maria said, joining Lena with a clipboard in hand. "The antibiotics are working, and his legs healing faster than I expected. He could be ready for release soon." Lena nodded, her braids swaying as she glanced at the crocodiles. The larger one, nicknamed River by the sanctuary staff, lounged in the pool, its tail flicking lazily. The smaller one, dubbed Ember for its fiery spirit, snapped its jaws playfully at a floating log. Their recovery was a miracle, but Thunderheart's role in their survival was the heart of the story, a story Lena was determined to protect. "We can't just release him back to the wild," Lena said, her voice firm. "Not yet. The poaching ring's still out there, and his lineage makes him a target. We need a permanent solution." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking a preserve?" "Exactly," Lena said. "A protected range where he can roam with a herd, safe from hunters. The Blackfeet Nation has land set aside. My uncle's been pushing for a buffalo restoration project. Thunderheart could be the cornerstone." Maria smiled, jotting a note. "That's ambitious. You'll need funding, permits, tribal council approval." "I know," Lena interrupted, her eyes on Thunderheart. "But he's worth it." The past week had been a whirlwind. The sheriff's raid on the poacher's warehouse had uncovered a trove of evidence: cages, tranquilizers, and records linking the operation to an international trafficking network. The crocodiles, smuggled from a southern wetland, were destined for a private zoo in Asia, abandoned when the poacher's truck broke down. Thunderheart, grazing nearby, had stumbled across the trapped animals and chosen to stand guard, defying injury and instinct. Lena's investigation, aided by the tracker she'd found, had blown the case wide open, earning her a flood of calls from conservationists and scientists eager to study Thunderheart's behavior. But for Lena, it wasn't just science. It was personal. She'd grown up on stories of the buffalo's sacred role in Blackfeet culture, a symbol of resilience, a keeper of the land's spirit. Thunderheart's actions had rekindled something in her, a purpose she'd lost after years of bureaucratic battles and shrinking habitats. She felt it every time she approached him, like now, as she stepped into the paddock, her boots crunching on the grass. "Morning, big guy," she said softly, holding out a handful of alfalfa. Thunderheart turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers, and ambled over, his massive head lowering to nuzzle her hand. His warm breath washed over her, and she smiled, her heart swelling. This wasn't just trust, it was a partnership, a bond that had saved lives. "Lena, you've got company," Sam Carter called, jogging up from the sanctuary office. The young volunteer's freckled face was flushed with excitement. "Tribal council reps and a conservation group from D.C. They want to talk about Thunderheart." Lena sighed, brushing her hands on her jeans. "All right, let's do this." The meeting was held in a small office overlooking the paddock, where Thunderheart's silhouette loomed like a guardian. Lena faced a small crowd, her uncle, Joseph Black Elk, a Blackfeet elder with a weathered face and sharp eyes, 2 council members, and Dr. Claire Nguyen, a conservationist with the Wildlife Protection Fund. Sam hovered in the background, scribbling notes, his enthusiasm undimmed by the long days. "Lena, your report's making waves," Claire said, her tablet glowing with news articles. "Thunderheart's story is global. People are calling him a symbol of compassion. We're seeing donations pour in for buffalo conservation." Joseph nodded, his voice deep and measured. "The elders see him as a sign. The buffalo have always guided us. This one, he's waking people up." Lena leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Then let's use that. The Blackfeet have 10,000 acres ready for a buffalo preserve. We can relocate Thunderheart and a starter herd, protect them with patrols and fencing. His lineage could rebuild the population, and his story could fund it. The council members exchanged glances, one scribbling notes. "It's a big ask," said Mary Running Deer, her tone cautious. "The land's sacred, but the logistics, permits, grazing rights, poacher threats." "I know the challenges," Lena cut in. "But Thunderheart's already done the impossible. He protected those crocodiles, risked his life. We owe him a future." Claire tapped her tablet. "The Wildlife Fund can help with funding and federal support. But we'll need data, studies on Thunderheart's behavior, his genetics. His actions suggest cognitive abilities we've underestimated in buffalo. Researchers are clamoring to get involved." Lena's jaw tightened. She wanted Thunderheart safe, not studied like a lab specimen. But she saw the bigger picture. Science could amplify his legacy, secure the preserve. "Fine," she said. "Non-invasive studies only. He's not a test subject, he's a partner." Joseph's eyes crinkled with approval. "Spoken like a Blackfeet. We'll bring it to the full council." As the meeting ended, Lena stepped back into the paddock, the sun now high, warming her face. Thunderheart approached, his hooves thudding softly, and nudged her shoulder, his breath a low huff. She laughed, resting her hand on his flank, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. The crocodiles, River and Ember, basked nearby, their recovery a quiet victory. Lena's thoughts drifted to her own transformation, once a scientist numbed by bureaucracy, now a woman reconnected to her roots, driven by a buffalo's courage. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the prairie, Lena stood with Thunderheart in the paddock. The air was still, the storm's chaos a distant memory. She looked into his eyes, seeing the same resolve that had drawn her to him that first night. "You changed everything," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A plan was forming, a preserve, a legacy, a movement. The council was leaning toward approval, and Claire's team was drafting proposals for federal grants. Thunderheart's story had ignited a spark, not just for Lena, but for a world hungry for hope. As he galloped across the paddock, his massive frame a blur of power and grace, Lena knew this was only the beginning. The Montana prairie stretched boundless under a twilight sky, its grasses swaying gently in the evening breeze, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. Dr. Lena Whitefeather stood on a low rise, her boots planted firmly in the soil of the newly established Blackfeet Buffalo Preserve, a 10,000-acre sanctuary where the horizon seemed to touch the stars. Before her, Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, grazed peacefully among a small herd, his chestnut coat glowing in the fading light, the scars of his ordeal barely visible. His curved horns gleamed, and his deep bellows rolled across the plain, a sound that felt like the heartbeat of the land itself. In the distance, the sanctuary's enclosure housed River and Ember, the crocodiles, now thriving ambassadors for wildlife rescue, their presence a testament to an impossible bond. Lena's braid swayed as she leaned against a wooden fence, her weathered hands tracing the grain of the wood. The past year had transformed everything. Thunderheart's story, his selfless stand to protect two trapped crocodiles from poachers, had rippled across the globe, sparking a movement. The preserve, funded by donations and federal grants, was now a reality, its fences patrolled by Blackfeet rangers to protect the herd from the lingering threat of poachers. Thunderheart, with his rare genetic lineage, had become the cornerstone of a program to restore the plains buffalo, his descendants already roaming the land. Lena smiled, her heart full, as she watched him toss his massive head, his eyes catching hers across the distance. The sanctuary's impact reached far beyond Montana. Researchers, inspired by Thunderheart's actions, had launched studies on buffalo cognition, their findings reshaping scientific understanding of animal intelligence. Articles in journals described his behavior, guarding an unrelated species, collaborating with humans, as evidence of emotional depth previously unrecognized in bison. Conservation policies were shifting, with new protections for keystone species like the buffalo, and public awareness had surged, fueled by viral videos and a documentary titled Thunderheart's Stand. Lena had become a reluctant spokesperson, her Blackfeet heritage and scientific expertise bridging worlds, her voice carrying the Elder's wisdom to a global audience. She thought back to a quiet moment a month ago, when the preserve's gates had officially opened. Thunderheart had galloped across the open plain, his hooves shaking the earth, his herd following in a thundering wave. Lena had stood with her uncle, Joseph Black Elk, his weathered face lit with pride. "He's brought us back to the buffalo," Joseph had said, his voice thick. "And you, Lena, you brought us to him." That day, Lena had walked with Thunderheart, her hand brushing his flank, feeling the warmth of his coat. He'd nudged her shoulder, a gentle gesture that felt like a promise kept. The crocodiles, relocated to a permanent sanctuary in the south, had been there too, their enclosure a stop on the documentary's tour. River, the larger crocodile, had flicked its tail in recognition when Lena visited, a silent acknowledgement of their shared story. Ember, the smaller one, had snapped playfully at a stick, its spirit unbroken. The bond between them all, buffalo, crocodiles, human, defied explanation, yet it had changed everything. Now, as the stars emerged, Lena reflected on what Thunderheart had taught her. She'd come to this work hardened, her years as a biologist dulled by bureaucracy and loss. But Thunderheart's courage, his choice to protect the vulnerable, had rekindled her purpose. She'd found her place again, not just as a scientist, but as a Blackfeet woman, a steward of the land her ancestors had honored. His story had shown her that compassion could cross species, that trust could bridge worlds, that one act of bravery could ignite a movement. She turned to the horizon, where the last light painted the Absarika Range in hues of fire. The preserve was more than a refuge, it was a legacy, a testament to the buffalo's resilience and the power of unexpected connections. Thunderheart's silhouette stood tall, a symbol of the wild, unbroken spirit of the American West. Lena touched the pendant at her neck, a small buffalo carved from obsidian, a gift from her uncle. "We're not done yet," she whispered, to Thunderheart, to the land, to herself. To you, reading this, Thunderheart's story is a call. The buffalo, the crocodiles, the prairie, they speak of a world where compassion transcends boundaries, where one creature's courage can change the course of many lives. Have you ever witnessed an animal's intelligence, its quiet strength, shift your perspective? Have you felt the pull of the wild, urging you to act? Support conservation, donate to sanctuaries, share stories like Thunderheart's, volunteer to protect the lands and creatures that shape our world. Reflect on the connections you've made, human or otherwise, and ask, what legacy will you leave? Lena looked out at Thunderheart one last time, his massive form a dark shape against the starlit prairie, his bellow a song of resilience. The future was uncertain, but it was bright, carried on the hooves of a buffalo who had shown the world what it meant to stand firm, to protect, to love.